The blood-red sunset spilled across the dusty main street of Willow Creek, Texas, as Daisy Evans stood helplessly watching two men haul her pristine white wedding dress through the doors of Tanner's General Store. The year was 1878, and at 23 she had nothing left but debts, broken dreams, and the memory of a fiancé who died 3 weeks before their wedding day. "$5 is the best I can offer, Miss Evans," Mr. Tanner said, his spectacles sliding down his nose as he examined the delicate lace and pearl beadwork. "It's a fine dress, but who's buying wedding gowns in these parts these days?" Daisy bit her lip until she tasted copper, fighting back tears that threatened to betray her desperation. The dress had cost her father $30 last spring before the drought took their crops, before the fever took her parents, and before Thomas had been thrown from his horse on a cattle drive just 20 miles from home. "Mr. Tanner, please." "That dress cost— I know what it might have cost in better times, Miss Evans," Tanner interrupted, not unkindly, "but $5 will at least keep the bank from taking your farm for another month." The bell above the shop door jingled, and the floorboards creaked beneath heavy boots. Daisy didn't turn around, couldn't bear to have another witness to her humiliation. "What's all this?" The voice was deep, unfamiliar, with a slight drawl that suggested he wasn't from Willow Creek. "Just a business transaction, stranger," Tanner replied. "Nothing that concerns you." Daisy felt the newcomer's eyes on her back, studying her rigid posture and trembling hands. "How much?" the stranger asked. "Pardon?" Tanner's eyebrows shot up. "The dress, how much?" $5 is what I'm offering." "I meant how much did it cost new?" Daisy turned then, curiosity overcoming embarrassment. The man who stood behind her was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His black hat was pushed back on his head, revealing a shock of dark hair that curled slightly at the edges. "He couldn't have been more than $30, she whispered. Without hesitation, the stranger reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather wallet. He counted out 6 crisp $5 bills and placed them on the counter. "I'll take it," he said. Tanner's eyes widened. "You want to buy a lady's wedding dress?" "Yes." The stranger gathered up the dress, carefully folding the delicate fabric over his arm. Then he turned to Daisy, extending the bundle toward her. Here, confusion washed over her. "I don't understand." The corner of his mouth quirked up in a half-smile that transformed his serious face. "Wear it for me," he said simply. The store fell silent. Tanner's jaw dropped open. Daisy felt heat rising to her cheeks. I don't even know your name, sir." He tipped his hat. "Zachary Thornton." "Just arrived in town, and you are—" "Daisy Evans." "Well, Miss Evans, I'd be obliged if you'd hold on to this." He pressed the dress into her arms. "Might be I'll need it someday." Before she could respond, he turned on his heel and strode out of the store, leaving Daisy clutching her wedding dress and wondering what kind of man paid $30 for a stranger's wedding gown with no explanation. The next morning, Daisy woke to the sound of hammering. She pushed aside the threadbare curtain at her bedroom window and squinted into the early morning light. There, mending her broken front gate, was Zachary Thornton. She quickly pulled on a simple blue dress, ran a brush through her auburn hair, and tied it back with a ribbon. When she stepped onto the porch, he straightened and removed his hat. "Morning, Miss Evans." "Mr. Thornton," she acknowledged, crossing her arms. "May I ask what you're doing on my property, fixing your gate?" He gestured to the now straight posts and mended hinges. "Noticed it was broken when I passed by yesterday." "That's very neighborly of you, but why?" He shrugged, his broad shoulders moving beneath his cotton shirt. "Seemed like the right thing to do. And the dress, was that the right thing to do as well?" His eyes met hers, steady and unreadable. "It matters to you, that's reason enough." "You don't know me, Mr. Thornton?" "No, madam, I don't." He put his hat back on. "But I'd like to." Daisy studied him for a long moment. Since Thomas died, she'd kept to herself, barely managing to keep the small farm running. The neighboring ranchers had offered to buy her out, but this land was all she had left of her family. She'd been scraping by, selling eggs and vegetables in town, but the banknote was coming due and she didn't have enough. "Where are you staying?" she asked finally. "The boarding house in town." "Mrs. Whittaker's." "Would you care for some breakfast, Mr. Thornton? It's the least I can offer for your help with the gate." A genuine smile spread across his face, transforming his features from handsome to breathtaking. "I'd be honored, Miss Evans." Over a simple meal of eggs, biscuits, and coffee, Daisy learned that Zachary had come from Colorado, where he'd worked on several cattle ranches. He'd fought briefly in the war as a young man, then drifted west like so many others seeking fortune and purpose. "What brings you to Willow Creek?" she asked. "It's hardly a bustling center of opportunity." He sipped his coffee before answering, "Heard there was good land available, thought I might put down roots." "You want to be a farmer?" She couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. He had the look of a cowboy, not a farmer. "Rancher," he corrected, "always wanted my own spread." "Land around here isn't cheap," she said carefully, "despite what you might have heard. I've saved up." He set down his cup. "Been working cattle drives for 10 years, living lean, saving every penny." Daisy nodded, understanding all too well the value of careful planning and how quickly fate could destroy those plans. "I appreciate the breakfast, Miss Evans," Zachary said, rising from the table, "and I'd be happy to look at that sagging porch rail before I head back to town." Before she could protest, he was already examining the loose boards of her porch. Within an hour, he'd repaired not only the railing but also a leaky water barrel and a broken hinge on the chicken coop. "Mr. Thornton," she said finally as he was preparing to leave, "I'm grateful for your help, but I can't help wondering what you expect in return." He looked genuinely puzzled. "Nothing, Miss Evans." "Then why help a stranger? Why buy back my wedding dress?" He stood silent for a moment, hat in hand, the sun highlighting the angles of his face. "When I rode into town yesterday, I saw a woman trying to hold on to something precious while the world was determined to take it away. Reminded me of my mother after my pa died." He paused. "Sometimes folks just need a helping hand, no strings attached." As he mounted his horse, Daisy called out, "Will I see you again, Mr. Thornton?" He smiled down at her. "Count on it, Miss Evans." True to his word, Zachary returned the next day and the day after that. He repaired her roof, helped mend fences, and even assisted with harvesting the small vegetable garden that had managed to survive the drought. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side through the hot Texas days. Daisy found herself looking forward to his visits, to his deep voice and the quiet strength he radiated. When he smiled, which was happening more frequently, she felt a warmth bloom inside her that she'd thought had died along with Thomas. A week after their first meeting, Zachary arrived with a small package. "What's this?" Daisy asked, untying the brown paper. "Just something I thought you might like." Inside was a small leather-bound book of poetry. Daisy ran her fingers over the embossed cover, touched beyond words. "How did you know I like poetry?" He pointed to the small bookshelf in her sitting room, where a few well-worn volumes were displayed. "Noticed you had a few, thought you might enjoy some new words." That evening, as the sun set over the prairie, they sat on her newly repaired porch swing, and Daisy read aloud from the book while Zachary listened, his eyes on the distant horizon. "My mother used to read poetry," he said when she finished. "Said it was like music without the fiddle." Daisy smiled. "She sounds like a wise woman." She was. His voice held a hint of sadness. "Lost her 5 years ago, pneumonia." "I'm sorry." Daisy hesitated, then added, "I lost my parents last year. The fever took them both within days of each other." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "And your fiancé, if you don't mind my asking?" "Thomas," she said softly. "He was a good man, worked for the Richardson Ranch. We were to be married in the spring, but—" She swallowed. "His horse spooked during a storm, threw him, broke his neck." Zachary's hand found hers in the gathering darkness, warm and calloused. "That's a heavy burden for anyone to bear." "It was the dress that nearly broke me," she admitted. "When the bank threatened to foreclose, I knew I had to sell it. I just never thought." Her voice trailed off. "That you'd have to give up the last piece of your dream," he finished for her. She nodded, surprised at how easily he understood. "Dreams change, Miss Evans. They don't always die." His words stayed with her long after he'd ridden back to town, echoing in her mind as she prepared for bed. She found herself opening the trunk where she'd carefully stored the wedding dress, running her fingers over the delicate fabric that Zachary had returned to her. "Wear it for me," he'd said. What could he have meant? The next morning, Daisy was surprised when a wagon pulled up to her farm instead of Zachary on horseback. Mrs. Whitaker, the boarding house owner, climbed down with a concerned expression. "Morning, Daisy," the older woman called. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but I thought you should know Mr. Thornton took ill yesterday evening, burning up with fever he is." Daisy's heart stuttered. Will he be all right? Doc Wheeler's with him now, but I thought perhaps. Mrs. Whittaker hesitated. Well, he's been spending so much time out here, I thought you might want to know. Without hesitation, Daisy gathered some clean linens and a jar of her mother's elderberry tonic. I'll come with you if that's all right. Mrs. Whittaker smiled knowingly. I thought you might. The boarding house was quiet when they arrived, most of the residents already gone for the day. Mrs. Whittaker led Daisy to a room at the end of the hallway, knocked softly, then opened the door. Dr. Wheeler, a graying man with kind eyes, looked up from where he sat beside the bed. Ah, Miss Evans. Mrs. Whittaker mentioned she was fetching you. Daisy barely heard him, her attention fixed on Zachary. He lay still, his face flushed with fever, dark hair damp against his forehead. She moved to his bedside, placing a hand gently on his brow. How bad is it? She asked the doctor. High fever, chills, probably from working in that creek water when he was fixing your irrigation ditch. Dr. Wheeler gathered his things. I've given him quinine, keep him cool and get fluids into him when he wakes. The fever should break by tomorrow if we're lucky. After the doctor left, Mrs. Whittaker squeezed Daisy's shoulder. I'll bring up some broth later. You'll stay with him? Daisy nodded, already settling into the chair beside the bed. Yes, I'll stay. Throughout the day, she bathed Zachary's face with cool water, spooned broth between his lips when he was lucid enough to swallow, and spoke softly to him during his restless moments. As evening approached, his fever seemed to worsen and he began to mutter incoherently. Hold on, she whispered, pressing a cool cloth to his neck. Please hold on, Zachary. His eyes fluttered open, glazed with fever. Daisy, his voice was rough, barely recognizable. I'm here, she said, taking his hand. The dress, he murmured, so beautiful. SHH, don't try to talk. No. He gripped her hand with surprising strength. Need to tell you. Tell me when you're better, she soothed. His eyes closed again and he drifted back into uneasy sleep. Daisy continued her vigil through the night, dozing occasionally in the uncomfortable chair, but never leaving his side. Near dawn, Zachary's fever broke. Daisy awoke to find him watching her, his eyes clear for the first time in hours. You stayed, he said simply. She nodded, suddenly self-conscious about her rumpled appearance and the intimacy of caring for him through the night. How do you feel? Like I've been trampled by a herd of longhorns. A weak smile crossed his face. But better, thanks to you. You'd have done the same for me, she said, busying herself with straightening the blankets. Yes, he agreed quietly. I would have. 2 days later, Zachary was well enough to return to his routine, though Daisy insisted he take it easy. They sat together on her porch, watching a thunderstorm roll across the prairie, bringing much-needed rain to the parched land. I need to ask you something, Daisy said during a lull in the thunder. Ask away. That first day in the store, why did you really buy back my dress? Zachary was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. Finally, he turned to face her. When I rode into Willow Creek, I wasn't just looking for land. I was looking for a place that felt right, somewhere I could belong. He paused. Then I walked into that store and saw you, standing so proud even though I could tell your heart was breaking, and I just knew what? She whispered, that I'd found what I was looking for. His eyes held her steadily, not just land but a reason to stay. Daisy's breath caught in her throat. You don't even know me. I'm learning, he said gently. Every day I learn something new about Daisy Evans. How she hums when she's working in the garden, how she loves poetry but can't abide novels, how she's stronger than anyone gives her credit for. Rain pattered on the roof, creating a rhythm that matched her quickening heartbeat. When I said wear it for me, Zachary continued, I didn't mean right away. I meant someday, when you're ready, if you ever decide you could care for a man like me. The truth of his words and of her own feelings washed over Daisy like the rain outside. In the weeks since Zachary had entered her life, something had changed. The weight of grief had lightened, replaced by something new and fragile and hopeful. I think, she said carefully, that day might come sooner than either of us expected. His smile was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. The following weeks brought a shift in their relationship. Their conversations deepened, touches lingered, and glances held new meaning. Zachary continued to help around Daisy's farm, but now they worked side by side as partners rather than benefactor and recipient. Willow Creek began to take notice. Mrs. Whittaker was the first to comment. her eyes twinkling as she mentioned how Mr. Thornton hardly spent any time at the boarding house anymore except to sleep. Mr. Tanner remarked on the change in Miss Evans when she came to town, how she smiled again and hummed softly as she selected goods from his shelves. Even Sheriff Miller, a taciturn man not given to gossip, observed to his deputy that the Evans girl seems to have found her footing again, thanks to that newcomer. But not everyone viewed the blossoming relationship with approval. Arnold Richardson, owner of the largest cattle ranch in the county, had been eyeing Daisy's farm for years. His ranch surrounded her property on 3 sides, and the creek that ran through her land would provide valuable water access for his expanding herd. Richardson had made offers before, first to Daisy's father, then to Daisy herself after her parents' passing. Each time he'd been politely but firmly refused. When Thomas was alive, Richardson had backed off, respecting the young man who worked for him. But after Thomas's death, his offers had become more persistent, the amounts lower, as if he expected Daisy's circumstances to eventually force her hand. The arrival of Zachary Thornton had disrupted his plans. On a warm Saturday in late summer, Daisy and Zachary rode into town together. She needed supplies, and he had finally found a piece of land he was interested in purchasing, a small but promising plot about a mile from Daisy's farm. As they tied their horses outside the general store, Richardson approached, flanked by 2 of his ranch hands. "Miss Evans," he said, tipping his hat. "Thornton," Zachary nodded politely. "Mr. Richardson." "I understand you're looking to buy the old Hoffman place," Richardson said, his tone conversational but his eyes sharp. "That's right. Shame about that. I was planning to make an offer myself. Need more grazing land for my herd." Daisy tensed, recognizing the implied threat. The Hoffman place was relatively small, not nearly large enough for Richardson's needs, but perfect for someone starting out. "Well, it's a free country," Zachary replied evenly. "Guess it'll come down to who makes the better offer." Richardson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Indeed, though I wonder if a drifter like yourself can match what I'm willing to pay." "I'm not a drifter anymore," Zachary said. "I plan to put down roots here." "Is that so?" Richardson's gaze shifted to Daisy. "And I suppose you're encouraging this notion, Miss Evans?" Daisy lifted her chin. "Mr. Thornton makes his own decisions, just as I make mine, like the decision to keep refusing my offers for your property," Richardson asked. "You know, with the bank note coming due next month, you might want to reconsider." Zachary stepped forward, his body angling slightly in front of Daisy's. "Miss Evans isn't interested in selling, and her financial matters are her own concern." Richardson's face hardened. "For now, perhaps. But circumstances change." He tipped his hat again. "Good day to you both." As he walked away, Daisy released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That man has had things his way for too long," Zachary finished for her. "Don't worry about him," but Daisy did worry. Richardson wasn't known for taking rejection well, and he had considerable influence in Willow Creek. The bank manager, Mr. Phillips, was a close friend of his, and the timing of Richardson's mention of her banknote was not coincidental. Her fears proved justified the very next day when a letter arrived from the bank, informing her that her loan was being called in immediately due to reevaluation of the property's value. The full amount, nearly $300, was due in 2 weeks, not the month she had expected. When Zachary arrived that afternoon, he found her sitting at the kitchen table, the letter crumpled in her fist, tears streaming down her face. "Richardson," he said grimly after she explained. Daisy nodded, wiping her eyes. "I don't have that kind of money, Zach, not even close." He paced the small kitchen, his expression thunderous. "This isn't right. He can't just change the terms of your loan because he wants your land." "Apparently he can. Mr. Phillips has always done whatever Richardson asks." Zachary stopped pacing and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "We'll fight this, Daisy, together." "How?" she asked, despair creeping into her voice. "Even if I sell everything I own, including the dress, I wouldn't have enough." A determined look crossed his face. "I have savings." "Enough to buy the Hoffman place, but no," she interrupted firmly. "I won't take your money, Zach. That's your dream." "You're my dream," he said simply. "The land is just land." She stared at him, her heart pounding. It was the closest he'd come to declaring his feelings outright. "I can't let you do that," she whispered. Let me help you, Daisy, please, she shook her head. There has to be another way. They spent the evening discussing options, from appealing to the bank's board of directors in the next county to seeking legal counsel. But the reality remained stark. Without the money to pay off the loan, Daisy would lose her family's farm. As Zachary prepared to leave for the night, he paused at the door. "Promise me you won't give up," he said fiercely. "Promise me you'll wait until we find a solution." She nodded, though hope felt like a distant memory. "I promise." The next morning, Daisy woke to the sound of voices, many voices coming from her front yard. She quickly dressed and hurried outside to find nearly a dozen townspeople gathered, tools in hand. Mrs. Whittaker was organizing women unloading baskets from wagons, while men were already beginning work on various projects around the farm. "What's happening?" Daisy asked, bewildered. Mrs. Whittaker smiled warmly. "Barn raising, dear. Well, not exactly raising a barn, but you get the idea." "But I didn't ask for Zachary did," said Mr. Peterson, the blacksmith. "Said you needed some improvements to increase the value of your property before the bank's assessment." Daisy's eyes widened. "Bank assessment?" "That's right," came Zachary's voice as he approached from the barn, where he'd been directing efforts. "I had a talk with Mr. Phillips this morning, convinced him to send out an independent assessor from the county seat to reevaluate your property before finalizing the loan recall." "How did you manage that?" she asked, amazed. He grinned. "Let's just say I reminded him that bank fraud is a serious charge and changing loan terms without cause might interest the federal banking examiner. And all this," she gestured to the bustling activity around them. "Folks around here care about you, Daisy. They're not too fond of Richardson's methods either. When I mentioned what was happening, they volunteered to help improve the farm to boost its assessed value." Tears welled in her eyes as she took in the scene. Neighbors she'd known her whole life working together to save her home. Mrs. Peterson and her daughters were planting flowers along the front path. Sheriff Miller and his deputy were repainting the house. Even old Mr. Hoffman, whose property Zachary hoped to buy, was there repairing chicken coops with experienced hands. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Zachary's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "Say you'll accept their help, our help." She nodded, throat too tight for words. For 3 days, the work continued. Fields were cleared, fences mended, buildings repaired and painted. The modest farmhouse shone with fresh paint and polished windows. New curtains, donated by the ladies' sewing circle, hung in every room. The vegetable garden was expanded and replanted with fall crops. By the time the bank's assessor arrived, a serious man named Mr. Grayson from the county seat, the Evans farm had been transformed. "I was told this property had fallen into disrepair," Mr. Grayson commented as Daisy led him on a tour. "We've made some recent improvements," she said carefully. "Indeed." He made notes in a small book. "And the property includes how many acres?" 40 acres with water rights to Miller Creek." Mr. Grayson nodded, continuing his methodical assessment. When he finished, he closed his notebook with a decisive snap. "Miss Evans, based on my evaluation, this property is worth considerably more than the amount indicated in your loan documents. I will be recommending that the bank reconsider its position." Relief flooded through her. "Thank you, Mr. Grayson. Don't thank me, young lady. I'm merely doing my job." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "Though I will say, it's refreshing to see a community stand together against certain business practices." 2 days later, Daisy received another letter from the bank. This one rescinded the loan recall and offered to extend her original payment schedule by 6 months, with a slightly reduced interest rate in recognition of property improvements. She ran all the way to the boarding house, letter clutched in her hand, bursting into the common room where Zachary sat reading the weekly newspaper. "We did it," she exclaimed, waving the letter. The bank backed down. Zachary leapt to his feet, catching her as she flung herself into his arms. Without thinking, she pressed her lips to his in a joyful kiss. He froze for an instant, then responded with such tenderness that her knees weakened. When they finally pulled apart, the room had emptied discreetly, leaving them alone. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," Zachary admitted, his voice husky. "What took you so long?" she teased, though her heart was racing, waiting for the right moment. His hand cradled her cheek, "Waiting to be sure you felt the same way." "I do," she whispered. I didn't think I could after Thomas, but with you, everything is different. He kissed her again, more deeply this time, and Daisy felt the last pieces of her grief-hardened heart melt away. That evening, they sat together on her porch swing, Daisy tucked against Zachary's side, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. I made an offer on the Hoffman place today, he said, his fingers tracing patterns on her arm. Mr. Hoffman accepted. She tilted her head to look up at him. That's wonderful, Zach. It's just a start. 10 acres isn't much, but the soil's good. I can build on it. You'll make it work, she said confidently. You've already proven that. He was quiet for a moment, then said, It's about a mile from here. Close enough to ride over every day, but his eyes met hers, serious and full of emotion. But I'd rather not have to ride back and forth at all. Daisy's breath caught as she understood his meaning. Are you saying what I think you're saying, Zachary Thornton? He shifted, turning to face her fully. I know it hasn't been long, Daisy, and I know you've had more than your share of heartache, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet pouch. I'm not a wealthy man. What I have, I've earned through hard work. What I want can't be bought. He opened the pouch, revealing a simple gold band with a small pearl set in the center. This was my mother's. I'd be honored if you'd wear it. Tears filled Daisy's eyes. Are you asking me to marry you? I'm asking you to build a life with me, to combine your farm with my land so we can create something lasting together. He took her hand. I'm asking you to wear that beautiful dress for me as my wife. Daisy thought of the wedding dress carefully preserved in her trunk. The dress that had represented so much loss and pain now transformed into a symbol of new beginnings. Yes, she said, her voice steady and sure. Yes, I'll wear it for you. The town of Willow Creek had never seen a wedding quite like theirs. Held on a perfect autumn day 6 weeks later, it took place in the meadow between Daisy's farm and Zachary's newly purchased land, a symbolic joining of their properties as well as their lives. Lanterns hung from tree branches, tables groaned with food contributed by every family in town, and flowers decorated every available surface. Sheriff Miller, who also served as the town's justice of the peace, officiated with uncharacteristic emotion in his voice. But it was Daisy who stole everyone's breath when she appeared on the arm of Mr. Hoffman, who had offered to give her away. The wedding dress, with its delicate lace and pearl beadwork, caught the golden afternoon light, transforming her into a vision of radiance. Zachary, waiting for her beneath an arch of autumn flowers, felt his heart stop at the sight of her. As she walked toward him, he remembered that moment in Tanner's store when he'd first seen her trying to hold on to her dignity along with her treasured dress. He'd known then, somehow, that his life had changed irrevocably. You're wearing it, he whispered when she reached him. She smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears of joy. For you, just as you asked. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises to stand together through whatever life might bring, to build something lasting from the foundation of their love. As Sheriff Miller pronounced them husband and wife, a cheer went up from the gathered townspeople. Even Mr. Phillips from the bank was there, looking slightly uncomfortable but genuinely pleased for the couple. The celebration lasted well into the night, with music and dancing under the stars. Richardson was conspicuously absent, having left town on urgent business. The day before, though rumors suggested his hasty departure had more to do with an unexpected visit from the federal banking examiner than any actual business needs. As the evening waned, Daisy and Zachary slipped away from the festivities, walking hand in hand through the moonlit fields that now belonged to both of them. Happy, Mrs. Thornton? Zachary asked, pulling her close. More than I ever thought possible, she replied, tilting her face up for his kiss. Later, as they stood on the porch of what was now their home, Daisy paused before entering. I never thought I'd wear this dress again, she said softly, running her hands over the fabric. After Thomas died, it became a reminder of everything I'd lost. And now, Zachary asked, she smiled up at him, her heart full. Now it's a reminder that sometimes when you think all hope is gone, life finds a way to give you something even more beautiful than what you lost. He swept her into his arms, carrying her across the threshold. I'll spend my life making sure you never regret giving me that second chance at love, he promised. I already know I won't, she whispered against his lips. Spring arrived early the following year, bringing with it new growth and possibilities. Daisy and Zachary had spent the winter combining their properties, planning expansions, and making their house truly a home. The farmhouse had been enlarged with an additional bedroom and a proper study where Daisy could pursue her newfound interest in writing. Zachary had converted part of his land into grazing pasture for the small herd of cattle he'd begun to acquire, while maintaining Daisy's vegetable gardens and chicken coops. Together, they had created something neither could have managed alone, a thriving homestead that produced enough income to pay off Daisy's bank loan ahead of schedule and allow for further investments. But their greatest joy came on a mild April morning when Daisy placed Zachary's hand on her still flat stomach. "Are you sure?" he asked. Eyes wide with wonder, she nodded, smiling at his amazement. "Dr. Wheeler confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby around Christmas time." Zachary whooped with joy, lifting her and spinning her around until she laughingly protested. "Careful with your wife and child, Mr. Thornton," he set her down gently, pressing his forehead to hers. "A child," he whispered, "our child. The first of many, I hope," she said softly. "As many as you want," he promised, kissing her with such tenderness that tears sprang to her eyes. That evening, as they sat on their porch swing watching the sunset, now a cherished daily ritual, Zachary asked, "Have you thought about names?" Daisy leaned against his shoulder. "If it's a girl, I'd like to name her after your mother. You've spoken of her with such love." Zachary's arm tightened around her. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "she'd have loved you, Daisy, almost as much as I do. And if it's a boy," he considered for a moment. "What about Thomas?" Daisy looked up at him in surprise. "You wouldn't mind?" "He was important to you," Zachary said simply. "He's part of what made you the woman I fell in love with. I'd be honored to name our son after him." In that moment, Daisy knew with absolute certainty that she had been blessed beyond measure, not just with a second chance at love, but with a man whose generosity of spirit matched his strength of character. As the weeks passed and summer bloomed across the land, Daisy's body changed with the growing life inside her. Zachary watched in awe as her stomach rounded, frequently placing his hands on her belly to feel the baby's movements. One warm evening in late July, as they prepared for bed, Daisy opened the trunk where she kept her most treasured possessions. Carefully, she lifted out her wedding dress. "What are you doing?" Zachary asked, curious. "I've been thinking," she said, running her fingers over the delicate fabric. "This dress has seen such a journey, from symbol of loss to symbol of new beginnings." She looked up at him. "I'd like to transform it one more time." "Into what?" "A christening gown for our baby," she said softly, "and perhaps someday a wedding dress for our daughter. A legacy of love to pass down through generations." Zachary crossed the room and took her in his arms, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "You never cease to amaze me, Daisy Thornton." "Nor you me," she replied, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. "When you walked into Tanner's store that day, I thought you were just a stranger with an odd request. I never imagined you would become my whole world." "I knew," he confessed. "Not everything, of course, but I knew you were special from the first moment I saw you." "Is that why you said wear it for me? Because you already knew," he smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I hoped. Sometimes that's all a man can do." As autumn painted the landscape in rich hues of gold and crimson, Willow Creek experienced an unexpected boom. The railroad had finally extended a line through the county, bringing new opportunities for trade and growth. Property values rose, businesses expanded, and new families arrived seeking fresh starts. Among them was a young doctor from Philadelphia, eager to establish a practice in a growing community. Dr. James Cooper and his wife Sarah quickly became friends with the Thorntons, their shared love of books and music creating an immediate bond. "You need a proper hospital, Doctor," Cooper declared one evening as they dined together at the Thornton home. "Even a small one, the nearest medical facility is 30 miles away." "The town council has discussed it," Zachary said, "but funding has always been the issue." "What if we formed a committee?" Daisy suggested. "Raise the money ourselves." Sarah Cooper's eyes lit up. "A charity auction, perhaps. People could donate goods or services." The idea took root, growing into a community-wide initiative that captured everyone's imagination. Zachary donated a prime acre of land near the town center for the hospital site. Mr. Tanner offered building supplies at cost. Even Mr. Phillips from the bank made a substantial donation, perhaps still seeking to redeem himself in the town's eyes after the Richardson affair. As her pregnancy advanced, Daisy threw herself into organizing the charity auction, determined to ensure Willow Creek would have proper medical care by the time her child arrived. The event was scheduled for late November, giving them ample time to gather donations and spread the word to neighboring communities. "You're working too hard," Zachary said one evening, finding her at the kitchen table surrounded by lists and ledgers. "The baby is perfectly fine," she assured him, patting her very prominent belly. "Besides, I want to make sure he or she has a proper doctor and hospital if needed." He couldn't argue with that, especially given his own mother's death from a treatable illness simply because medical care hadn't been accessible in time. The day of the auction dawned clear and cold, with the first hint of winter in the air. The town hall had been transformed with bunting and flowers, tables laden with donated items ranging from handcrafted furniture to homemade preserves, from quilts to promises of professional services. Daisy, now 8 months pregnant, presided over the event with remarkable energy, her face glowing with purpose and pride. Zachary watched her from across the room, still sometimes unable to believe how fortunate he was to have found her. The auction was a tremendous success, raising nearly twice the amount they had hoped for. As the last item was sold and the crowd began to disperse, Daisy made her way to Zachary's side, her hand pressed to her lower back. "You were right," she admitted with a tired smile. "I may have overdone it a bit." "Let's get you home," he said, concerned by the pallor that had replaced her earlier flush. They had barely reached their wagon when Daisy gasped, clutching her stomach. "Zach," she whispered, eyes wide, "I think the baby's coming." "But it's too early," he said, panic rising in his throat. "Only by a few weeks," she managed before another pain seized her. "We need Dr. Cooper." Zachary lifted her into the wagon with infinite care, then raced to find the doctor. Within minutes, they were heading for the Thornton farm, Dr. Cooper following close behind in his own buggy with Sarah and Mrs. Whittaker, who had experience as a midwife. The labor progressed rapidly, too rapidly, in Dr. Cooper's estimation. By midnight, Daisy was exhausted, her strength waning as the contractions intensified. Zachary paced outside the bedroom, each of Daisy's cries cutting him like a knife. When Mrs. Whittaker emerged to fetch more hot water, he grabbed her arm. "Tell me the truth," he demanded, his voice raw. "Will she be all right?" The older woman's face softened. "She's young and strong, Mr. Thornton. Dr. Cooper knows what he's doing, but it's in God's hands now, as these things always are." It was the answer he had dreaded. Zachary sank into a chair, head in his hands, and for the first time since his mother's death, he prayed with desperate sincerity. Near dawn, as the first pale light crept through the windows, a new sound filled the house, the lusty cry of a newborn. Zachary's head snapped up, his heart pounding as Sarah Cooper opened the bedroom door. "You can come in now," she said, smiling through her exhaustion. "They're waiting for you." On trembling legs, he entered the room. Daisy lay propped against pillows, her face etched with fatigue but radiant with joy. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket that Zachary recognized as having been fashioned from part of her wedding dress. "Come meet your daughter," Daisy whispered. He approached the bed as if in a dream, sinking down beside his wife and child. The baby's face was red and wrinkled, a dusting of dark hair like his crowning her tiny head. "Elizabeth," he murmured, touching the infant's cheek with a reverent finger. "Elizabeth Thomas Thornton," Daisy corrected softly. "I hope you don't mind the adjustment." Tears blurred his vision as he gathered both of them in his arms, overwhelmed by love and gratitude. "She's perfect, you're perfect." Dr. Cooper cleared his throat. "She came early, but she's strong. Just like her mother." "Thank you," Zachary said fervently. "All of you, I don't know how we'll ever repay you." "That hospital you helped fund will be repayment enough," the doctor replied. "Now we'll leave you three alone. Mrs. Thornton needs rest, but she insisted on seeing you first." After they had gone, Zachary stretched out on the bed beside Daisy, cradling his family in his arms. "You scared me," he admitted. "I thought I might lose you." "Never," she promised, resting her head against his shoulder. "We Thorntons are made of sterner stuff." He smiled at that, pressing a kiss to her damp hair. "Indeed you are." As baby Elizabeth slept peacefully between them, Zachary reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a chance encounter in a general store to this miracle of new life, their path had been neither straight nor easy. There had been obstacles and heartaches, unexpected allies and determined adversaries. Yet through it all, the binding thread had been a wedding dress, a symbol of dreams deferred and dreams fulfilled, of endings and beginnings, of a stranger's kindness that had blossomed into the deepest kind of love. "What are you thinking about?" Daisy asked sleepily. "About how sometimes the most precious gifts come in unexpected packages," he replied, "and about how grateful I am that I walked into Tanner's store that day." "As am I," she murmured, her eyes drifting closed. "As am I." As the winter sun rose higher, casting golden light across the bedroom, Zachary held his wife and daughter, knowing with absolute certainty that no man had ever been more blessed. Whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together, a family forged through adversity and bound by a love as enduring as the land they called home. In the years that followed, the Thornton family thrived along with their expanding ranch. Elizabeth grew into a spirited girl with her father's dark hair and her mother's quick intelligence. 2 years after her birth, she was joined by a brother, Thomas, as promised, and 2 years after that by twins Samuel and Grace. The wedding dress, now transformed into christening gowns and keepsake items for each child, remained a treasured family heirloom. Daisy kept a small piece of the lace in a locket she wore always, a reminder of the day her life had changed forever. Willow Creek prospered as well. The hospital was built and expanded, becoming a regional medical center under Dr. Cooper's skilled direction. The railroad brought commerce and new settlers, transforming the once sleepy town into a bustling community. Richardson never returned, having found his banking practices under federal scrutiny following anonymous reports of irregularities. His ranch was eventually divided and sold, with the Thorntons purchasing the section that adjoined their property, creating one of the most successful operations in the county. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zachary surprised Daisy with a trip to San Francisco, a city she had always dreamed of visiting. As they stood on the deck of a ferry crossing the bay, watching the sunset paint the sky in familiar shades of gold and crimson, he wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Any regrets?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. She turned in his embrace, studying the face she had come to know better than her own, the lines at the corners of his eyes from squinting into the sun, the touch of silver at his temples, the smile that still made her heart race after all these years. "Only that we didn't meet sooner," she replied, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. "I disagree," he said thoughtfully. "We met exactly when we were supposed to, not a moment too soon or too late." Daisy considered this, thinking of all the circumstances that had brought them together, her losses, his wandering, a wedding dress that had symbolized both heartbreak and hope. "You're right," she said finally. "Everything happened just as it needed to bring us here." "And where exactly is here?" he teased. She smiled, taking his hand and placing it over her heart. "Home, wherever we're together, that's home." As the ferry docked and they joined the stream of passengers disembarking, Daisy reflected on how far they had come from that day in Tanner's general store. The young woman, desperately trying to hold onto her last possession, would never have imagined the life awaiting her, a life built on love, perseverance, and the unexpected kindness of a stranger who had seen her worth when she had forgotten it herself. "What are you smiling about?" Zachary asked as they made their way through the busy streets. "Just thinking about a wedding dress," she replied, squeezing his hand, "and the man who asked me to wear it for him." His answering smile was as bright as the day they had met. "Best words I ever spoke." "Best words I ever heard," she agreed. And together they walked toward their future, bound by a promise made and kept, in a dress that had witnessed both the end of one dream and the beginning of something far more beautiful than either could have imagined.